way God puts himself in culture, which is the Eucharist.
That's right. Nothing abstract. God presents himself through the Eucharist and enables us to really have the perfect worship, to offer something infinite in value back to him. And, people often ask, okay, are you serious? Okay, can the Eucharist really build civilization? And my answer is, it did it before, right? When you think about it, in Western Europe, civilization collapsed, and it was literally rebuilt out of the monasteries around the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
By the way, if you want to talk with Dr. Staudt, 888-318-7884 is our number, 888-318-7884. Two things that I immediately feel are remedied in your book. One is the kind of American individualist religion. That is, even Catholics, I think we're infected with this idea that essentially the Eucharist is a me experience. It's how can I get more out of the Eucharist? How can we, that kind of thing. So that's the first thing that's remedied. Will you say something about that you really see the Eucharist as much more than just what I get? It's not a me mechanical type thing.
Yeah, when we think of receiving the Lord in communion, communion means to be one with. And so we are truly transformed into Christ as members of his body, and he lives through us. We become his tabernacles, but mystically united to him, and of course united to all the other members of the body. And so it really does create a perfect culture. And it is something that is not just spiritual. I'm not just, in my own house, reading the Bible and say, this is religion. But this is something that it draws me into this communion throughout all of time and space, going all the way back to the beginning. The people of God throughout history and throughout the world right now into every country.
And the second thing that it remedies, I think, is just this idea, as you started with, that we can build culture, that culture is something that almost we feel like we can just in a manipulative way build culture. Like if we just get our banking system right and the benefits programs right, and we and we spread democracy, then culture will just de facto be built. But that's not where thriving human culture comes from.
Yeah, there are human elements to culture, right? It is a particular people living in a particular place who have shared practices together. But what for ultimately? I mean, we are not made for this earth. And so human culture, even though it does help us to survive and to try to thrive here on earth, it is ordered towards something beyond itself. And human beings could never simply be satisfied on bread alone. And so God has given us a super substantial bread that will satisfy our deepest hunger. And actually, it will help us to build an even better culture here on earth. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else will be added onto you. So by eating that super substantial bread, we're actually better at forming culture. We're better at our work, our relationships, that everything that we do becomes transformed through the supernatural communion that we have with God.
And so you said that the Eucharist did it before. Give us kind of the narrative, I suppose, of how did the Eucharist build the world that we live in now?
Well, we think of the early church, of course, being a persecuted minority. And then, over time, Constantine converts, and it seems like the church has won. Well, in the West, civilization collapses, and Catholics find themselves being ruled by barbarians who were mostly Arian, although some of them were also pagans, like the Franks. And so the church had to civilize them. But how did that happen? It was largely through the work of the monks who were dedicated to the Opus Dei, the work of God. And the monks built up within the monastery a complete culture. They were self-sustaining. They had the first hospitals of Europe. They had schools. They perfected things like, wait for it, brewing beer,
Oh, yeah, there he is, Mr. Beer.
And,
yeah.
Yes. So building up these works of culture, but all ordered towards the work of God, towards giving God glory. And it really was out of those monasteries that the monks became Catholic. And so the monks not only gave them the faith, and you think of these great missionary monks like St. Boniface, and there's dozens of these great monastic missionaries, but they also taught the barbarians how to read and how to write, and they took care of them through their hospitals, and of course taught them how to pray.
And this, yeah. So this is like, I guess in the cities, there was the diocesan church structures, but the monks really went out into the hinterlands. They went out into the nowhere, and in a certain way, they changed even the physical world. That the world of Europe before the monks went out there, just physically what it was, and the world that they left behind, they were two different worlds. They had transformed even the physical place.
And when, around the year 1000, cities became more important, often they were formed around the monasteries. And so you even have like the city of Munich as a classic example, München, from Munch, monk, right? The city that grew up around St. Peter's Abbey. But we see that throughout Europe. And so from the year 500 to the year 1000, it was monasteries, not cities, that were the central cultural institution.
And what's the role that the Eucharist plays in all of that? So you can see the civilizing role that is making people civil in the sense of being able to do the things like read and make families and keep families and have institutions like hospitals and schools and all those things that make people civil. But in addition to that kind of sociological role of the monasteries, what's the role of the Eucharist in all of that?
Well, there's a cultural function. I mean, the barbarians were nomadic, and so why were they going around plundering things? It's because they needed to eat. Yeah. And so the monks did teach them agriculture, and so how to grow the wheat that is needed for the Eucharist. And of course, the monks perfected winemaking as well, especially in Burgundy, but throughout Europe. And so there was a way in which they taught the peoples of Europe how to produce the cultural goods needed for the Eucharist. But then by actually celebrating the Mass, we see literally how civilization grew up around it, right? You think of the great cathedrals, even Western music itself. It grew out of Gregorian chant, the music that was created for divine worship. And we see all these particular ways in which the Mass really became the central focus of Western civilization. It's not an exaggeration to say that, right? I mean, all the great masterpieces of art, everything that we love about Western civilization, it grew up around the Mass.
And it really is. Like, you have a quote in there, and I'm sorry that I won't remember who the quote comes from, but Western civilization is the Mass. Who was that said that?
It's John Senior from the Restoration of Christian Culture.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what is Christian culture? It is the Mass, he says.
Yeah. So so would your thesis in part be that the great kind of advance that humanity makes at the end throughout this period from 500 to 1500, a kind of rebuilding and innovative building of new kinds of societies, then we see this rapid advance over the last 500 years that we call modernity. Would it be your contention that none of that is possible without a Eucharistic foundation?
Well, I think it's literally true, right? That the church did build Western civilization, and so the culture that grew up in the West out of the Mass is the culture that laid the foundations for even modern science, right? Out of the universities. And we have Bishop Grotest and we have Father Roger Bacon laying the foundations for the scientific method. And so we can see how even the universities grew out of the monasteries, the cathedral and monastery schools both. But you look at the University of Paris, and there were 3 Benedictine monasteries that it drew from for the foundation of that university. And Father Roger Bacon was there at the University of Paris laying the foundations for the scientific method. So it's not a leap to say that, right? That even the modern world, that we are immersed in grew out of this culture. But, we've lost our soul. And I would say we're losing our bodies as well, right? I mean, we're kind of getting it from both ends, because we looked at how the Eucharist stimulated material culture as well. But how much contact do we have to the roots of culture? within nature, within work where we're really getting our hands dirty, and even laying the foundation for the Eucharist in both agriculture, also the crafts that went into kind of fashioning the churches and all of the art. We're thin in that area. And I think that's part of the reason why, we don't have the proper soil for even the most important elements of faith to take root.
So would you also say that the habits of the society over that 1,000 years, say from 500, where you think of 500 because this is around the time when the monasteries begin, to 1,000 or 1,500, where the monasteries now come under the attack of many parts of Europe who have forgotten what their purpose is, that all throughout all of that time, it's also true that the potentials of human beings, individual human beings, change because so many lives, so many generations are, in a certain sense, soaked in the Eucharistic blood. That they're just that in other words, we're not just talking about. And I know that you're not in the book, How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. You're not just talking about some kind of sociological change. There is the fact that God is now accompanying people and living within people. It makes a difference to what society is possible.
Yeah, culture really is an inheritance that we receive from the past. And you can look from 500 to 1,500, and you do see this building up of Christian culture from one generation to the next. And I think you're right, with the Eucharist being the center of that and transforming the lives of people within those 1,000 years. And that really brings us to the conclusion of the book. How can the Eucharist change civilization? By changing you.
Yeah,
that's what
right.
it is. We gather around the altar, and we are transformed by the body and blood of Christ, and that begins to change everything else. And so, really the central section of the book is, how do we remove the obstacles in us to be able to receive the graces that we need to live differently, to overcome the challenges of modern culture in a slow way, in a seemingly small way at first, to begin building something new.
How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. It's the new book by Dr. Jared Staudt. Book by after book, he really just builds a reputation with the reader that you're going to get wonderful things when you read his books, and this one too, so full of wonderful things. How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. If you'd like to ask Dr. Staudt questions, we're going to take a quick break, but we'd be happy to take your calls. 888-318-7884.
Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I don't like looking back. I prefer to look forward and keep moving forward. There's plenty to cover. I do a lot of research and try to dig out the bits and pieces of a life or of an agenda that people don't want to talk about.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Thursday night, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest is Dr. Jared Staudt, author of some very fine books, including The Beer Option, which it'll always be mentioned because it's such an awesome title. He's never gonna. No, he could write the next. I don't know, the next Iliad. Doesn't matter. He's always going to be the guy who wrote The Beer Option, which is about culture and beer and monasteries and all that cool stuff. Now he's got a brand new book out called How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. We do have callers on the line for you, so if it's all right with you, Dr. Staudt, we'll get you some questions. All right.
Sounds great.
All right, let's go to Glenda in Winter Haven, Florida. Where I believe spring training happens, watching on YouTube. Glenda, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Staudt.
Thank you. Last night, I opened up a can of worms by making a post on Facebook about a particular chocolate bar company that I would never eat again. And I generally don't speak up on things. I'm pretty quiet. I like to listen to people and try not to judge. But I posted that, and I think that created an all-out brawl on Facebook.
Wow.
I've been dropped by a couple of people.
Oh.
So I want to know how the Eucharist can change our culture. I guess I need to read your book because it's probably not an easy answer.
Well, I just have one question for you. Was it Hershey's chocolate you were writing against?
Yes.
What they do?
Okay.
I'm curious.
Because
I'm dying of
literally
curiosity.
I am right from that area.
You're from Hershey,
it's like
Pennsylvania?
15 minutes to the Hershey chocolate factory from my house. Yeah, I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, right by Hershey.
Oh.
So anyway, I'm sure I'm with you on that point, but I wanted to comment too about the beer option from the introduction there. Really, I wrote this book to try to atone for writing the beer option, to say, okay, now I'm going to write about sacramental eating and drinking. The reason I mention that in relation to chocolate, right, is that we should have our conscience awakened by the Eucharist. And there are many things that we should be aware of what we are eating. Are we really eating things that are rightly ordered for our body? Are we eating just junk? What goes into the food that we eat? Does it use slave labor? Because there's some concerns about the ethical harvesting of chocolate. The cacao beans, right? And so I think this is very relevant. And, one of the things that the Eucharist should do, and we see this in 1 Corinthians, is that it should make us aware of those who are not eating, right? Paul says, how can you come and eat the Lord's body when you are not discerning this body right in front of you, right? And that relates both to our Lord's presence in the Eucharist, but it also relates to those who are hungry right in front of the Corinthians' faces, literally in front of their faces. And so I do think that there is a lot to be said for how the Eucharist fundamentally changes the way that we eat, changes the way that we drink, which is why I mentioned the beer option. And it should make us especially more aware of other people, because eating is a source of communion. And so the whole food process, right, of growing and harvesting and food production, of purchasing, of eating, that all of this should be guided by going into church and receiving the Eucharist and being drawn into communion with one another. And we should see our eating as an extension of our sacramental eating.
Glenda?
I'm sorry?
Are we getting to what you were asking?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
Oops.
So what you're asking, because what you expressed was you're a mild-mannered person, not looking for trouble. You post something about a chocolate company, and a brouhaha erupts on social media to the point where people are disconnecting from you on social media, canceling you or whatever the proper word is. And so you wanted to know what from Dr. Staudt regarding the Eucharist?
Well, I just want to know, you say that it will change our culture. The Eucharist can change our culture, and I think ultimately I do believe that, but I don't see any signs of it. And I also just thought to myself, I was happy for the first time to really defend my faith.
Oh.
And I didn't mind what was coming back at me. I kind of felt proud of it. But maybe I shouldn't be doing anything that is going to affect, I don't think it affects more divisiveness because people believe what they believe. But I just would like to believe that the Eucharist can bring us all together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I always think of Acts of the Apostles. You have Paul and his fellow workers going into Ephesus. They're challenging the status quo of the Romans, and they're accused of turning the world upside down. And so I think that there is a way in which we can't simply allow people just to, just believe whatever they believe, because how can we change the world that way? We have to share the truth in love. Paul reinforces that. John in his letters reinforces that, to share our faith in love, that if we're really convicted, and it sounds like you were, and I was trying to make a connection between the ethical practices, right, of producing food, because that's a work of culture, right? But
Sure.
You were convicted to share the truth about something. And if you do it charitably, then I don't think you have to worry about being divisive, because the truth ultimately is what will unite us. Jesus is the truth, and we will be united when we come under his reign. And I think the Eucharist is the most effective way of entering into the kingdom and being governed by Christ. But if we follow in his footsteps, we will be a sign of contradiction and we will be persecuted. And so, yeah, you should expect that, right? If you're standing up for the truth with charity always, right? But if you're doing that, then you will suffer like Christ does.
Right. I didn't say anything bad about anyone, and I did approach it. I said that I love everyone. I don't hate anyone. And I was still attacked, and I was very much hated. But it was only by 3 people, but they just took up the whole conversation and attacked anyone who defended me.
Glenda, just real quick, when you say, I said I loved people, I don't hate anyone, and I wanted and then people attack me, remind you of anybody?
Well, yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's the story of Christian life, and he said, I mean, if they do this to me, you better expect they're going to do it to you.
That's right.
But thank you so much, Glenda. Now I have to search social media and find out what Hershey chocolate did. But
yeah.
But
the Eucharist should make us into witnesses. I think that's the key point here, right?
Yeah.
That is part of the way we're going to change things, is if we become effective witnesses.
Thank you, Glenda. We're talking about the Eucharist with Jared Staudt. Jared has a wonderful new book out called How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. It's a bold claim, but rooted, as Dr. Staudt has already mentioned, in history. It did it once. As a matter of fact, it created this civilization. It doesn't seem like you're counseling us to withdraw from the world or something, but so how do we unleash this Eucharistic power if you really believe it can save civilization?
The first thing is, I think a lot of Catholics need to remove the obstacles. So we need to go to confession. We need to do penance. And we need to fast. Here we are during Lent, because we have to be ready to eat spiritual food. And so there has to be a withdrawal from our normal way of living, and this preparation. I think we need to spend much more time in prayer in front of Eucharistic adoration. And we need to really receive the Lord fruitfully in communion so he can change us. That's step one.
Well, I got in the way of callers. There's a bunch more callers, so I'm going to let them ask Dr. Jared Staudt their questions. We're talking about the power of the Eucharist to save civilization. 888-318-7884.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com. CALive.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Dr. Jared Staudt, our guest. Dr. Staudt, before I go back to the phones, you've had a little bit of a life change the last time we saw you, and we do hear lots of folks who are doing the Exodus 90. Am I saying it right? The Exodus 90 program?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exodus 90.
And the main things I know about that is 90 days, no hot showers. And so what are you doing there, and what's going on there?
Yeah, so back in December, I began my role as the director of content for Exodus 90. And so our anchor program is 90 days, but it is not simply cold showers. It does include that, but it is also where we're not eating junk food, we're not using media, doing fasting, a holy hour. I mean, that's crucial. And you also have to do it in a fraternity with other men. It's a communal program. And I think that's really why it works. It's that combination of prayer, asceticism, and fraternity that makes it so transformative. And, we had tens of thousands of men do it well, they're doing it now, actually, leading up to Easter. And we also have men doing a Lenten program. But we are really trying to offer more programming year-round, and that's where my role comes in. So I'm even creating an Easter program for this year, which will actually involve asceticism, yes, but also celebration. And
Good
just
for
trying
you.
to create a sustainable rule of life to kind of carry us beyond the 90 days. And we are going to be really trying to continue these principles year-round moving forward.
Talking with Dr. Staudt about the Eucharist today, however, because he has this wonderful new book, How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. On the line is James in Virginia, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. James, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Staudt.
Hey, thank you for having me to talk. Here's my question. I'm buying everything you're saying. I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school, military, I'm in State Department, and this is what I found out. Every organization, in the long run, just like the Catholic Church started out with noble causes, eventually they go through a life cycle where they get greedy, they need money, and that becomes almost like it's like any business. They just become a business where they got to pay off lawsuits for all the things that went wrong a few years ago. The thing I keep hearing about how the Catholic religion, and I love Catholicism because I don't want to go to hell, so I'm going to follow it by the rule. I go to confession, I go to communion, but each week. But I just find the whole thing to be almost ridiculous. The concept of the Eucharist is going to save the world. Let's just get our house in order first. Just like the army, if you don't get the house in order, we're going to lose the war. We're going to lose the war, and we won't even have an organization to worry about. Something happened. I don't know what the answer is, but something happened to the Catholic Church. I think it's about money. If you don't believe me, open up a bulletin to get my mother there on Sunday or my dad. It's $150 because they're going to get some special blessing. I know it's got to happen. I know it's for real. I know they need it. They got bills and all that stuff. But I think it went a little too far with the Vatican. I think money's going to be, as they say, the root of all evil. So everything you're saying philosophically is phenomenal, but pragmatically
but not
speaking,
practical. Yeah.
Unless you're my dad, like with 2 jobs, that ain't gonna happen in the real world, in my opinion.
James, hang on.
I'll be glad to take the answer off the air.
You don't want to? Okay, we could make it a conversation if you'd like, but
I said to the caller, I don't want to come off as a nut job, but you just no.
Yeah. No, hang on.
I'm
Let's
not even
get
going to
Dr. Staudt's
disagree
response.
with you. Yeah. So, here on page 280 of my book, what does it say? The precondition, renewal in the church. So I'm not going to disagree with you, but I believe that the Catholic Church is a divine institution founded by Jesus Christ. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But what you say has happened not just now, but it's happened many times throughout church history. If the Catholic Church were just a human institution, we would have killed it a long time ago, and it would be dying and already dead now. And so that's how we actually know that it is a divine institution, is that we try so hard to kill it, and somehow it doesn't die. And it does go through these cycles. Like you said, there are cycles to organizations. What happens to other organizations? They just die, and then something else starts. Whereas the Catholic Church has actually gone through many periods of renewal when things looked finished. I mean, if you look at France in the early 1800s, it looks like it was just done. Like the year 1800, there's no Catholic Church left in France. Like some priest celebrating Mass in a barn. Nobody can, go to Mass. And then you look at the 19th century, it's a period of great saints. You have Saint Bernadette, Saint Therese of Lisieux, many others. And so there really is this miraculous renewal of the church. And then, we're screwing it up again. Here it comes. But why? I think it is precisely the Eucharist. We believe that the Lord truly makes himself present in the flesh to his body to renew it, so that, what happens when we eat food? We make that food into ourselves. St. Augustine says, well, when you eat the Eucharist, what happens? You become it rather than vice versa. So, I agree with you. I'm not going to say everything's perfect in the church right now. We have our act together. Have confidence in the human elements of the church right now. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say have faith in the Lord's presence in the Eucharist. And if we take it much more seriously than we are right now, we remove the obstacles, we really dedicate ourselves to prayer, to penance, and to forming real community in our parishes. If you think back to the confraternities and guilds in the Middle Ages, they were real sources of community. I think we're missing that. It's like we have the church, we go to Mass, but what about the rest of our lives? That's really the rallying cry of this book, is that our whole lives need to be saturated by this. We need to live radically different than the world. And if we do that, the church is not going to look like it looks like right now.
Well, I appreciate that. You touched that part of my brain that needed a little inspiration. I'm buying your book anyway, because I'd like to continue the same line of inspiration. So I appreciate your explanation and coming on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
Wonderful.
Thank you. What a wonderful call. Thank you very, very much. The number is 888-318-7884. We're talking about the new book from Dr. Jared Staudt, How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. If you'd like to get in on that conversation, you're very welcome here. Next is Joseph in Boston, Massachusetts, watching on YouTube. Joseph, let me get to the button here, and go ahead, Joseph, with your question for Dr. Jared Staudt.
My question, I guess, is, so if, as you say, the Eucharist awakens our conscience, it allows us to recognize these issues in greater society, like the problem of transgenderism, as referenced by the earlier caller. How do we help people bridge what can be like a lengthy gap between today and the day when they become a communicant? Because I don't find, personally, philosophical arguments against these issues to be all that sufficient in proving them to be wrong. And so do you agree that philosophical arguments often fall short and theological arguments are required for these issues? And how do we bridge that gap?
I would actually say, great question. I would say before theological arguments can really have an effect, we need people to see it. And I think that's what we're really missing is Catholic culture, right? So how are these principles embodied? Do we act like we believe in the Eucharist? And, you gave the example of transgenderism, and, I'm not just going to say, well, the Eucharist will solve that problem, but there is something very beautiful about the Lord wanting to be seen. Okay, yes, under the sacramental species, right? So we see the accidents of bread, but he wants us to be able to see that sacramental presence, to come into our mouth, to taste and to touch. There's something very physical about that, something very concrete, right? God's not just like, I'm up in heaven. And we really are, in our culture, experiencing an identity crisis. And so what I would say is that the Eucharist is a sign that God is here with us in our midst. And he wants us to bring our brokenness and our wounds into even this physical intimacy with him. There is nothing more powerful in my life than simply sitting before the Blessed Sacrament. And I bring just knots into prayer. I'm all bound up and struggling with this thought or this problem. I don't know what to do. And it's just the concreteness of sitting in the Lord's physical presence where I just feel those knots just untangling. And there's just something changing in me. And so I would say that people need to be drawn into a community of people who are showing love and concern for them concretely and as who they are, despite any confusions or difficulties, and that they can be drawn into a community that truly believes and is willing to die for the fact that Jesus is here in the flesh. And I think that could begin to heal wounds. I mean, it's not just, okay, bring the person before the Eucharist and everything will just change overnight. But maybe, I don't know. That's how my life changed. I was kicked out of school in the 7th grade. I was confused as heck. Only the Catholic school would take me in. So I show up at the Catholic school as a non-practicing Catholic. The priest invited me. Thankfully, I had my first communion. So he invited me to serve Mass 6:15 in the morning, one morning. So I show up, receive the Eucharist, and that was it. I felt like the Lord spoke to me at that moment. He said, this is what you are looking for. This is where you will find your home. And it was just the concreteness of that particular community that I was invited into in the school and finding the Lord within that community. So I think people have to see it in us to say, that person's different. That person treats me differently. That person believes in something, and that, we can bring them into a culture, not just into ideas. And I think when they see it, then they might be like, okay, well, I want to learn more about this. I want to talk to you about this. People don't generally like to be aggressively argued with, just to say, I think you're wrong. Let me tell you why you're wrong. I'm going to give you great theological arguments. Nobody likes that, actually. Now, I mean, I think there's a context, right, where we do the pre-evangelization, we lay the groundwork, and we help people to have an encounter with the Lord in the concreteness of the community and the concreteness of his Eucharistic presence.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was great insight. I'm just curious, how has the time to become a communicant, so whether you're reverting or if you're converting initially, always been as long as it is right now, or was there a time in history where it was not as long, or was it longer? I'm just curious.
It was longer. The catechumenate in the early church averaged about 3 years. But the catechumenate was restored in the early 1970s. So previously, you would just go and meet with a priest, let's say the first part of the 20th century, and the priest would give you instructions, and when he thought you were ready, he would just initiate you. If you're a revert and you've received your sacraments previously, well, then you just need to go to confession. And, if the priest says that you're ready to receive, then you can, just start receiving. If you're not confirmed, right, then you could, you need to go through a process to receive that sacrament. But so it happened different ways throughout history. Of course, in the Middle Ages, everyone was pretty much Catholic, so it wasn't as much of an issue. But in the early church, it was really rigorous preparation. And when you think about it, it was necessary because someone would probably be risking their life to become a Catholic in the early church. And we may get there again. We'll see.
Joseph, I got to leave it there because I got to take a break. Dr. Jared Staudt, our guest. More questions for Dr. Staudt. You are welcome to call if you'd like to get in the line to ask your question, 888-318-7884. The brand new book is called How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. Your call is welcome, and we'll do that right after this. Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
EWTN is the only radio station I play when I'm in my car. I try to listen to your show as much as I can. I listen at work.
I was riding around yesterday crying. I didn't know about your show, and I turned on EWTN on my radio. There it was about grieving. Maybe it was God-inspired.
My mom, she was the one that got me into EWTN 24/7.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Scott Weeman will be here next hour, and we're going to talk about addiction and recovery from a Catholic perspective. He's the founder of Catholic in Recovery and the author of the Sacraments and the 12 Steps. And just also, if you've heard Scott before, we just always have a great hour. And so if that, I was going to say if that's of interest to you, but the fact is pretty much all of us have some connection to addiction and recovery in the family, in the workplace, in our own lives. So if you've got questions, hang on for next hour, and we'll discuss that with Scott Weeman. The number here is 888-318-7884. We're talking about the Eucharist, not just as a personal encounter, which it in most certainly is, but as the foundation for the very culture that we live in, and a foundation that if we can set things again on that foundation, we can again have a culture that works, and maybe even, as Pope John Paul II said, a culture of love. To talk about that, Dr. Jared Staudt, he wrote the new book, How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. And I feel like some of the questions, I just wanted to characterize this for you and see if this is a challenge that you get. But one of the requirements, if you're going to say, put your faith in the Eucharist as having the power to right what is wrong, to restore what's been lost, to build what humans can't build for themselves out of a culture, is now your life is tied up with the virtue of patience in a way that the political person is not, the economic person is not. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if my solution is the next election, well, it's a lot more, there's a lot more immediacy to that. You're really in it for the long. If you say the Eucharist is the key, I'm going to live a Eucharist life, I'm going to Eucharistic life, I'm going to invite others to live a Eucharistic life, and that's really the hope for culture, you've committed yourself to a long-term project, not a short-term project.
That's absolutely right. And if you think of the Lord really lodging himself in my heart, right, and guiding and directing my life from within, what's he going to do? What would he have me do? Run for president? Maybe some people eventually, but pretty much it's going to be love your wife more, educate your children in virtue and in wisdom, do a better job at work, be just and to treat others well, and to volunteer at my parish and maybe try to have an impact on the others there, maybe get a group of like-minded people together to pray, to do good works. And that might be it. And you know what? When you look at like Jan Taranovsky, who just did those things, he was a tailor. He gathered a small group of people together. One of those people was the future St. John Paul II, Yeah. It's just like if we actually just do those things, they will have a ripple effect. And that will go through generations. The Lord says he will bless, up to the thousandth generation after those who are faithful to him. So he plays the long game, and we can really be an important link in a great chain, from Jesus through the apostles down through the century.
I feel like there's kind of induced panic at the moment, though. Like, we're losing everything. Culture is shattering. It's falling apart. Like that kind of thing. I need a quick answer. I don't have time to wait. I can't live in that kind of time. You see what I'm saying? It feels like a
Yeah.
panic right now. It feels like in some ways a cultural panic.
And I think without the Eucharist, once again, not only would, the church be lost, as I said earlier, but we
Yeah.
would be lost too. You think like, oh my gosh, everything is falling to pieces. And yet it's all right there. I mean, everything that we need is there. And you can say, well, wait a second, I have to eat. I have to do this. And it's like, yes, keep coming to eat that food. And then he will guide our work. He will guide our relationships. And he will start building out from there and getting our lives in order. And we have to have faith that if we put first the kingdom, truly everything else will be added on to us.
Amen. Daniel on YouTube asked this, though. Why isn't the effect of the Eucharist more evident in the lives of those who take it?
Yeah, and we've been talking about the Pew, opinion poll, about the Eucharistic belief or lack thereof amongst Catholics, and only a third of Catholics even say they believe in transubstantiation, that the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ. So one, people don't even believe in the Eucharist. Even those who receive it don't believe in it. And I think someone who might notionally say, oh, sure, yeah, the church teaches that, I believe that, right? Do you act like you believe it? Do we treat Jesus like a piece of bread at Mass?
Mm-hmm.
Are we acting like this is the Lord of the universe right here before us? And then are we removing the obstacles, right? Because if you receive the Eucharist regularly, you need to go to confession regularly. That's consistent throughout the entire Catholic tradition, is that confession is the sacrament that helps us to receive the Eucharist worthily, not only in forgiving mortal sins, but also venial sins. Are you preparing yourself? When you think of all the preparation that we do, even all the years you go to school, the training that you do for your job, even preparing to receive the Eucharist for the first time or preparing to get married, all this preparation, how much preparation do you give for receiving the Eucharist on Sunday? Do you do any? Or do you just rush into church and just go through the Mass, receive the Eucharist, and then leave, get out in the parking lot, and drive away? We actually have to prepare ourselves to open ourselves to these graces, and then afterwards, you should sit, you should stop, make a thanksgiving, let these graces kind of just really sink in, to thank the Lord for these graces, and come back. So I think we really need to have a life of prayer. We need to root out the vice and sin that kind of are those thorns that are choking out the graces, and really take the Eucharist much more seriously, like it really is, as awesome as it is.
Yeah. Dan in Louisville, Kentucky, listening on Holy Family Radio. You are up next, Dan. We're grateful for your call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Jared Staudt.
Well, it's more of a comment, but I really find it refreshing that you're talking about revitalizing Catholic culture in the parish. I think, sometimes there can be these polemics where people have an axe to grind and they want to attack the church, and they'll say, well, what about this in history or what about that? And then I remember asking a friend of mine that I went through grade school with, I was like, well, what about our teacher who taught us how to read in first grade? Like, that was at our parish, and we went to Mass every week, and that was part of the rhythm of that life, that we're doing Holy Week, or we do Lent, Ash Wednesday, that the school and the parish were more than just like an argument, and more than just that there's a like the Eucharist is a communion, and then living that communal life in the parish reinforces that, and that's life-giving and it's sustaining. And it was just very refreshing to hear this.
Yeah, and one concrete proposal there is that it's a very ancient tradition going all the way back to the beginning. We see it in 1 Corinthians. We see it in Pliny the Younger's letter to the Emperor Trajan, that Christians would not only come together for the Eucharist, but also to eat a meal together. And so I think that would be an important practice to revitalize. Some Orthodox churches are still doing it. People traditionally have called it the agape meal. But so we come together to worship and to receive the Eucharist. But if we would stay for a meal afterwards, or come back, or meet together in our homes as families to celebrate the Lord's Day through a meal, I think that would go a long ways towards revitalizing parish culture.
Yeah, and those conversations are vital, because how do you know how to live out those, works of mercy. If you don't know anybody that's in the pews with you, how do you know who's struggling? How do you know who needs, their wounds cared for, whether they're physical wounds or, more spiritual type thing? I think having a vital parish culture, it solves a lot of things because it isn't an argument. It's a lifestyle and culture, and it's attractive. Mm-hmm. It draws people in.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things we lack in our culture is commitment to people. And I think that's what you're saying, right? We need to commit to one another to build that culture in our parish.
For sure. And I think it takes work, but the buildings are there, the rooms are there to meet in. We just have to meet, to just do
Absolutely.
it, So, well, thank you for your work, and thank you for this broadcast.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks very, very much for the insightful commentary and conversation. Dr. Jared Staudt is our guest. The new book is How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization. It really is. It does. The way that you talk about it, it has a kind of. You even use the word ripple. That the idea is to encounter Christ in the Eucharist, and then share that communally somehow with other people, not to just keep that as my hidden reality. Let's put it under a bushel basket, so to speak. And then it's those communities constituted by this shared Eucharistic spirit that then go and become the makers of the music and the beauty and the traditions and all the things that will make a Eucharistic culture.
Mm-hmm. And parishes that are truly alive, right? They're going to be rich in the works of mercy. They're going to really invest in a dynamic school that is deeply forming young people in the faith. They're going to have, active communities of families and really be inspiring people to enter into vocations, not only to the priesthood religious life, but to marriage, right? We have a crisis in the vocation of marriage. And I look at that in the book because ultimately the Eucharist is marital. The Lord is offering his flesh to us, his whole self, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And what does he ask for us in return? Our whole selves, so that we can become one with him. And then that will bear fruit, right? It will. That's the ripple effect, right? If I am changed, it'll change my family, it'll change my friends, my work, it'll change my parish life. Everything will be different. The Eucharist is what makes us into saints. And if we are saints, like St. Catherine of Siena said, we will set the world on fire.
Dr. Jared Staudt, now with Exodus 90. Where can you find out about Exodus 90? Where can people find out about that?
Exodus90.com.
Well, that's a clever way to do that. Exodus90.com. He wrote The Beer Option, but keep reading his books and come to How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization, continuing a series of really, really helpful books in the Christian life. Thank you, Dr. Staudt, for a really fine hour.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up, Scott Weeman. We're going to talk about the sacraments, addiction, and recovery. If you'd like to get in on that conversation, give us a call, 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. As promised, Scott Weeman here with us. He just brought in, set it down next to me here, the Catholic in Recovery Workbook, A Guide to the 12 Steps. This is one that, whatever your recovery involves, whatever it might be that you are in recovery from, this is a wonderful, wonderful book. It's part of the whole Catholic in Recovery organization, doing wonderful work. There's meetings in parishes, there's meetings online, and now the workbook. Scott's got his book, which is The Sacraments and the 12 Steps.
Yep.
Yes?
Yep.
Oh, I finally got the
12
title
Steps
right.
in the Sacraments.
The 12 Steps in the Sacraments,
Close.
but I say, okay. Yep. I was reading from the bottom up. But, And if none of that is enough for you, well, you can just call Scott right here, 888-318-7884, talking about addiction and recovery, the Catholic perspective, and also the many riches that the Catholic Church gives for those who are in recovery. And sometimes we talk about the riches that the Catholic Church could give. Like there's still plenty of opportunity for us to grow as a church, isn't there, in developing in sharing the riches of the church for those in recovery.
Yeah, I think leaning into the healing nature of the healing ministry of Jesus, and enlivening and giving life to the sacraments and fellowship and the amazing healing that the body of Christ can provide to the body of Christ, particularly as it relates to addiction.
Yeah,
there's a lot that priests, incredible leaders, and really move forward the mission as church. And it's also, there are plenty of people in communities who have found recovery from a variety of addictions and are grateful and are excited to share it with others who are seeking recovery.
Right.
And just like in our faith, when we share our faith with others, it grows within us. When we share our recovery with others who are seeking what we have, our recovery grows inside of us. It's not too complicated. It's simple but not easy, though.
By the way, 888-318-7884, the number. We love it when you call. Maybe there's a family member, a family situation, maybe your own recovery you want to talk about. Maybe recovery is something that you're aspiring to or considering. Whatever the situation, if you'd like to talk about healing from addiction and recovery, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. One phrase I don't think that I have talked with you about in the many conversations that we've had is Pope Francis's wanting the church to go out to the margins and be with those in the margins. Mm-hmm. And there's a way in which addiction is marginalizing. Like when you're talking about being trapped in addiction, you're talking about being marginalized from the rest of society. Really, it's very isolating.
Absolutely. And in my experience, and I'm here as a recovering alcoholic and addict of nearly all sorts, when I was active in my addiction, it felt like I was just outside of this really big circle that everyone else was in. Like there was almost this memo that I just didn't get.
Yeah.
And I know that others feel that way too, who are active in addiction or are struggling with this attachment to something not of God. It might be an attachment to food, alcohol, drugs, technology, gambling, lust, all different symptoms of the same spiritual malady as I see it. And when we are attached to those things, then there's no room for the mission of Jesus to be active within us.
Right. And so the idea of the church, and this is one thing that your organization has done, but this is also, in different times and places, the church has been good at this and less good at it. But opening up the parish to meetings and that kind of things, that is a way of going out to the peripheries, going out to the margins.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, the people who are active in addictions feeling marginalized, like kind of on the boundaries of society in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think the way in the church that we've provided a solution to addiction has been kind of in that same vein. We've kind of pushed the solution to the peripheries of the church.
That's very well said. Yeah.
So rather, than we show up at the parish being like really the central field of ministry or of spiritual connection. There's not a lot, for a long time we come to the church to do the Bible studies or the video programs and things like that, and provide swimming lessons, let's say. A lot of people, but too oftentimes we're giving swimming lessons to people who are drowning. And so there's a lot more room for life support, activities that are involved, like spiritual life support. But when I say that we push those to the peripheries of the church, I mean, oftentimes we'll make a referral to, we'll go to Catholic Charities. They'll help you out.
Yeah.
They're doing wonderful things at Catholic Charities throughout the country and around the world. But we've kind of pushed them out, like if you've got a problem, don't bring it here to the parish. Kind of, make sure that you at least look good or reasonably good.
I know, clean up, and then you can come over here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which that does not sound like Jesus at all.
No.
I mean, there is a need for, you need spaces where families can be safe and have a wholesome environment. You need the worship space to be beautiful and inviting and all that. But that's not all we do. And there are plenty of opportunities. Thursday night, open the hall and have a meeting.
Exactly. And sometimes, there's varying degrees of welcomeness to the idea of a recovery fellowship in a parish.
Right.
Oftentimes, and most pastors and Catholic leaders around the country, I think once they hear of Catholic in Recovery or other Catholic recovery resources, they're eager to welcome it, and they know the need. They know the spiritual needs of their sheep.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, they hear it in the confessional. Having a place to refer people to where they can get connected with other people who have the solution is something that most leaders and Catholic priests and are eager to have.
Yeah.
Some will still take on an attitude which really, I think, furthers this idea of, healing has to happen on the margins of. I've heard before a priest say, "Well, Scott, why would I want a bunch of addicts and alcoholics showing up at my church?"
Really?
And something along that vein. And I kind of just scratch my head and look at them, and that they already are. They already are showing up.
That's a better answer than I would have given. Who do you think's coming to church here?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. A lot of people white knuckling it through Mass, Father, and maybe
Sure.
you'd like them to be fully present.
Exactly.
Because they know that they're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. 888-318-7884, the number, 888-318-7884. Yeah, that's right. When we push the problems to the margins, then what we create is a fake community instead of a real, because everyone's hiding their problems. Because I can't be here if I'm an addict. I can't be here if I'm, I've known people who just, there's nothing wrong with them except they just got out of prison and they don't feel like, I just got out of prison, I don't belong. Well, why would we want a church where a guy that just got out of prison doesn't feel like he can come to church?
Yeah, I think that's all over the church. I'm kind of not really as much of a young adult anymore, but I was very active in young adult ministry for a while.
Adults. Knock it off. You're not a young adult at all.
I once was, long ago.
Yeah,
and in connecting with young adults in particular, who we all struggle with lust addiction. Let's just take lust addiction, for example.
Sure.
Across the board, the number of people who struggle with lust-related addictions, pornography, masturbation, other sexual compulsions, is rampant.
Sure.
It's rampant. And priests know this because they hear it in the confessional. And we, so many people, though, in this young adult age, or regardless of age, if they're active in lust addiction or viewing pornography, or they don't have it all together, they feel almost as if they're not allowed in the church, or there's this great deal of shame. So shame creates a cloud over everything that really prevents us from seeking the solution, and just furthers us into the margins. Shame keeps us in the margins, and so we need to really, as a church, cut through that, be aware of that.
Yeah.
And speak about this stuff. Speak about the common challenges that individuals and families are experiencing. Not, recognizing just because we talk about it doesn't mean it's, it's not getting us stuck. It's actually talking about it and accepting our powerlessness over addiction, which is the first step of recovery, is really a movement towards the solution. The movement that an individual makes to find recovery from an addiction is very similar to the movement in which the institution of the church ought to be making, recognizing that there's a problem, and then providing resources and not being afraid to speak about it, but giving a space for individuals to find healing.
Catholic in Recovery, you can find them at catholicinrecovery.com. You can get the Catholic in Recovery workbook there, and find all kinds of other resources. There's already callers. I'd like to go to a call.
Sure.
That's right. Let's go to Anonymous in South Carolina. Anonymous, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I felt like this is the perfect opportunity to call. Just had a long discussion with a family member about my current situation. I've been a methamphetamine addict for a little over 5 years now, and I don't necessarily feel the shame in the church. I know that may be different from parish to parish, but my thing is, I feel like I'm doing most of the things right throughout this process, going to church regularly, receiving the sacraments, praying rosary fairly often, trying to stay on that currently. And I have been clean for a little bit of time now, but it seems I called in last week, and as a matter of fact, excuse me, yeah, I seem to, this addiction is very cunning. It just sneaks up on me at time to time after various lengths of clean time. And I was just wondering if I'm missing anything or if I could get some advice. I do need to start going to Eucharistic adoration more. I have kind of been slow on that. But I was just curious to hear your thoughts. I know it's kind of a long-winded, kind of out there question, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Anonymous. And certainly there's others who have, I wonder, are you still on the phone? Because I've got a question.
Yes.
Great. So it sounds like you're active in your church, and it sounds like the addiction, cunning, baffling, and powerful. You mentioned that. When you go out or relapse, you're not deciding to spoil all the good things in your life. You're not making that active choice of, I think I'm going to ruin my life tonight by re-engaging in this addiction. I'm sure that that's not how it plays out in your mind, but rather it's just a response to something that comes up. And it sounds like you have a very active life in the church. You say, you could be doing more, but active in your community. And I wonder, what have you tried as far as recovery fellowships, or what have you done to seek recovery or connect with others who are in recovery?
Yes. So very recently I started attending the Narcotics Anonymous meetings, usually up to 4 times a week now for the last 3 weeks. Been doing that, and I've been in VA treatment program. I just completed a month-long session of every day, Monday through Friday, half days. Feeling much better now. I do feel different than previous times, more committed. But right now, those are the two main things: the NA and the VA.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a great pursuit. I would, I think that if you pursue your recovery with half the zeal in which you pursued your addictive behaviors, that God will have you in the right spot. You're in the right place right now, balancing recovery and participating in regular meetings where you can connect with other people who have been in your shoes and who can show you the way. It's like individuals who are just reaching into the well to lift you up. You're going to have an opportunity to reach back into that well and lift others up as well. So I would strongly encourage that within those meetings that you're participating in, find a sponsor. The way that this works is find someone in the group who has what you want, who's living a lifestyle that is appealing to you. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but just ask them to, can you show me what you've done? And ask them for coffee, or if you have time after a meeting, can I connect? Can I exchange phone numbers? And just explore what that working relationship with a sponsor might look like. And they'll walk you through the 12 steps in a way that they've been brought through the steps, and you can integrate your Catholic faith. Perhaps they're Catholic, perhaps they're not, but you would want someone as a sponsor to be supportive of your faith. They don't necessarily have to share the same faith, as long as they can share recovery experience and bring you through the steps. If they're actively working a program of recovery, cling to them. And I think that in addition to all that you're doing in the church, God's going to have you right where you're supposed to be.
Thank you. And it's funny you mentioned that, because that's the next on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely planning on getting a sponsor. So,
yeah, the way that it was told me, so and maybe we find a sponsor. The man who helped save my life, he kind of found me, darted across the room after this, I would say this first attempt back at recovery, and didn't give me any time, any wiggle room, but basically just darted across the room after the meeting, looked me in the eye and said, I know exactly how you feel. You don't ever have to drink again. And that was different from the way that concerned loved ones, family members, and friends were speaking to me. He was speaking from this authority, this experience that he had, which cut through all of this denial and shame that I had. And suddenly I had this little bit of hope. And hope is a great anecdote for, or a great solution for shame that is very common amongst us who struggle with a variety of addictions.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know what, too, also, sorry, Kasai.
No, go ahead.
I would say, you're going to, participating in recovery meetings, you might find some people who are have a personal bias against the church, or might share some anti-Catholic sentiment. Do not let that keep you from continuing to attend those meetings. Those are people who are hurt people, and I think that you can provide a hope and a presence, a Catholic presence within those secular meetings that also provides hope that perhaps others are looking for.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. I could not agree more.
Anonymous, I want to just say thank you before we let you go, because we do have to go to a break. But God bless you. I know that many of our listeners are praying for you right now. But your sharing has meant a great deal to us. I hope we'll get to talk again. Please do call again. But I got to go to the break, all right?
Thanks, Scott.
All right, God bless you.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live. Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Save the date. Saturday, August 26th is the day, and Birmingham, Alabama is the place for the 2023 EWTN Family Celebration. We're celebrating Mother Angelica's love for the Eucharist, and join us to mark the centennial year of Mother's birth. Make your plans now to attend this free event. More details coming soon at our Family Celebration webpage, EWTN.com/Family Celebration.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Just want to mention for fine freshmen, I assume they're fine freshmen at Catholic University, stopping by the studio while they are on spring break. Welcome to San Diego, Catholic University students, and thanks for coming by. Scott Weeman is our guest this hour. 888-318-7884 is the number. We're talking about addiction and recovery, and if you got a question in that regard, whatever the question is, you are welcome here. And by the way, you don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be Christian. If you got an addiction and recovery question, we'd love to get you an answer. And Scott's a good man to do it. 888-318-7884. We're going to Paula now in Huntingburg. Huntingburg, really? Listening on 93.1 FM. I never heard of Huntingburg before. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Oh, all right. All right. Huntingburg. Where everyone's got a gun.
I guess. I just took a drink, and I thought to myself before I took the drink, I thought, I hope I don't choke so that I can talk to them. And what do? I choked.
Oh, well, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. You put up with my dumb jokes, so I think you're doing all right.
All right. Well, let me get this. I've got a cough drop in my mouth. Maybe it'll help the situation. I was just commenting to your screener that I listened to. Well, let me tell you one life experience that I had. It's a real quick one. When I had a business, I had a technician that he was from Pennsylvania. I said, well, and my business was in Kentucky, and so I said, how did you make it from Pennsylvania to Kentucky? He said, well. He said, I was an alcoholic, and I had to get away from the element, all my friends. And my wife was always having migraines. So he said, we moved to Kentucky. I didn't take another drink, and she only had one migraine when we got here. And that was it. It was gone. They just had to leave,
Well, it's the healing power of Kentucky.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Paula, you have a question for Scott?
Oh, I have the question that I have has to do with where I worked in Florida for a Christian nonprofit where we had helped addicts and alcoholics, and and we had a men's house and a women's house. We put them through the program, got them on their feet, cut them out so they had a job and a way to make it through life. So all that being said, I worked in the thrift store that helped to finance the whole program. And so every time, I mean, it never failed. Every one of them that came from the house, the very first thing they would tell me was their hard luck, their bad luck, their bad situation. And so I guess my question would be, do you find that they get over that a lot? Do they because like I was saying to your call screener, I finally came up with this thing, and I asked her, I said, okay, tell me yes or no. Can you see your back? Yes or no? She said no. I said, no, I can't see my back either. So don't look back,
Well, is this a common?
What I'm saying?
Let me ask Scott, Paula. So the focusing on the negative, is this a part of addiction?
Yeah, I think this is certainly a very common experience for anyone who's seeking recovery from alcoholism or a drug addiction, food-related addictions, lust, any type of addiction or compulsion, is this great tendency to look back in the past with great shame, or look ahead to the future with great fear. Hence, we hear all the time, this is a one-day-at-a-time program, which means that we just focus on our efforts, what we can do today, what can I control today, what can I do within this 24 hours that I have today in order to be the best version of myself, or to surrender myself to God and His will. And so looking, a lifetime of recovery seems daunting and something that I can't even commit to, but I can commit to today. I can commit to being free and sober today. Now, again, this was my experience too. The shame of the past was haunting me from from doing anything in the future, making any progress towards a positive future. And it just, oftentimes in order to relieve ourselves from the shame of the past, alcohol, drugs, food, lust, these addictive or compulsive behaviors are oftentimes the solution to our problem, but they're also the problem. Our problem is caused by this source, whether it's a behavioral addiction or a substance-related addiction. We seek this, and that has great consequences. It creates shame. It creates relational challenges. And so in order to deal with the shame or the reality of our situation, which if we were to look at ourselves, our lives honestly in our situation, we would be overwhelmed with this, just overwhelmed with fear and how am I supposed to do this? And so we reach for the drug of choice. Maybe it's a substance, maybe it's a behavior, in order to find freedom from that obsessive thinking and this shame. And that just creates this cycle of addiction where the problem and the solution are hard to discern the difference between the two.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
Now, however, I would say, though, there is a healthy looking back, though. When we're working through the 12 steps, we're looking at patterns within our life. We're looking at resentments that we've been holding for a long time. And if we don't put that on paper, if we don't do the work to find freedom from those resentments or the fear which we may have been holding on to for such a long time, those things, fear, resentment, dishonesty, are really at the heart, kind of below the surface of the addiction. We need to get to the root of the problem, and that's a big part of it. The addiction, whether it's manifested through alcohol, drugs, food, lust, is really just a consequence of that inner discomfort. So we seek addiction as a means to cope. That addiction has, it really gets its claws in us, and then the problem and the solution are basically the same thing.
Paula, thank you very, very much for the call. I do appreciate it. The number here is 888-318-7884. Scott Weeman is our guest. Catholic in Recovery. If you listen to us for very long, you know that Scott is here from time to time, and we've had the great privilege of kind of knowing Scott while Catholic in Recovery has gotten really kind of, I don't know if the word successful is the word, but has found more and more ways of helping people in parishes, online. I mean, during the pandemic, you started doing the online stuff like everybody else did, and that's just grown by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, virtual meetings. You can find a virtual Catholic in Recovery meeting, probably about 30 different meetings a week, 5 or 6 different meetings happening every day, and a place where you can get active in your recovery. When the pandemic hit, we moved to virtual meetings right away, which provided a place for people who are seeking addiction recovery to find their daily medicine, really, on a regular basis. A lot of in-person meetings had been shut down, and so people were able to find Catholic in Recovery meetings. And also people who otherwise didn't live near a Catholic in Recovery local in-person group can participate. We've got people from all continents that join and participate. It's awesome to get the experience, the shared experience from people from different regions and cultural differences is really wonderful. We should also note, I got to say, we've got a few retreats upcoming. We've got a retreat up at the Mackenzie Bridge at the St. Benedict's Lodge in Mackenzie Bridge, Oregon, March 24th through 26th, and then also a retreat at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hanceville, Alabama. A great place to meet others who are seeking recovery from addiction.
Yeah, both sides of the Mississippi. You're getting covered. We're going to start these will be regular things?
Yeah, we've had a few in the past. We'll have a few more.
Very good. Check it all out at CatholicInRecovery.com. We've got a bunch of folks on the line. I'm going to let everybody that's on get to Scott. Don't worry. We'll be right back with more of Scott Weeman on addiction and recovery on Catholic Answers Live.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As Catholic apologetics have gotten stronger, Protestant responses have gotten stronger as well. And now they have their own answers to rebut the standard Catholic proofs. Don't fret, we've got you covered. In his new book, Meeting the Protestant Response, apologist Carlo Broussard gives well-reasoned biblical answers to Protestant comebacks. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Response today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Catholic in Recovery, a program started by Scott Weeman. It has grown and grown. You got lots of people involved in it now. I mean, and I know you got some. What was the group that helped you with the seed money? Remember that?
Our OSV challenge.
Sorry, your mic was off.
Yeah, the OSV Institute for Catholic Innovation. We were 2021. Awarded a top prize in the the OSV challenge.
Yeah, I always want to give them credit.
Still active? Yeah, me too. Our Sunday Visitor, wonderful things.
And now in parishes, online, you've got the workbook. This is very helpful stuff if you're in the recovery process yourself and you want to work through the workbook, the Catholic in Recovery workbook available at CatholicInRecovery.com. I just want to go back to the phones because there's a million people waiting to talk. Bella in Houston, Texas, listening on 1430 AM. Bella, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Hello. Yes, I was dating someone, and we were going to get married, and it took me a little bit of some time to realize, because I had never dealt with somebody that was addicted to drugs, so it took me a while to kind of pick up on the behavior and just the pattern. So anyway, my point is that my question is, how do you know whether or not you're being fair with the person, because they have such different sides and facets of being an addict, that you kind of see the good side first, and then there comes the dark side. And then, so anyway, after about 2 years of dealing with that, because I didn't want to leave because I cared for this person, but I finally decided, no, this is not positive, because, you know, it can get you in a lot of trouble on this end. And I decided to let the relationship go, because he'd go on a binge, and then, you know, I wouldn't hear from him for like 3-4 weeks, and then he'd call me back, and then it'd be that nice, you know, kind person. So that was the person that I liked, that side, and then it would happen all over again. And actually, recently, he called me like 2 days ago. Well, I didn't return the phone call or anything like that, but I was just wondering, you know, I don't want to be judgmental, and I'm on my own spiritual journey, and I was just wondering, how do you know that the Lord, how do you discern that, hey, that person is, it's not about them or you, it's just that it's not going to work out, you know? So that's my question.
Yeah. So what boundaries should I put up with an individual in my life who is struggling with an addiction? Mm-hmm. And of course, that's gonna be shaped by the nature of the relationship. If it's a mother-child, a parent, and a parent-child relationship is going to be different than a dating relationship, which is going to be different than a spousal relationship. I'm not going to speak in any absolutes here. There's a lot of nuance to the response to this question, and it's really you've got to do what's best for you and the spiritual well-being of yourself, and that might look like putting up some pretty clear boundaries in the relationship, which might look like, and it's going to be different from each person. But I'm not going to engage in a conversation or a discussion with you if you are under the influence of something, or that might be different. Also, if they're in recovery versus not in recovery or seeking recovery, I'll say this: one of the best things that anyone has ever done for me is break up with me. My recovery in many ways was kind of put in motion. I was dating a woman who was a wonderful woman, still is a wonderful woman. Haven't spoken to her for a long time. But we moved, started dating. I was 21 years old, had just 8 months previously, was out of treatment from alcohol and drugs, stayed sober for about 8 months or so, really just white-knuckling it, though. I thought I was too young to be an addict. And we started dating, and I started using again, and that relationship had a bunch of problems. I would lie and deceive and manipulate in order to avoid consequences. This might sound familiar to you or other listeners.
Yes.
And we moved from Wisconsin to San Diego, which kind of like moving from Pennsylvania to Kentucky, but what happened there was actually that's kind of like switching seats in the Titanic, a geographic change.
Oh, yeah, right.
Titanic still went down. And, so we did all these things, but it wasn't until I had realized the natural consequences of my behavior, which an addict who puts the pursuit of a substance or a behavior above all else, despite what we say, the actions would prove otherwise, that this was the most important relationship in my life at the time was my relationship with alcohol and drugs. And until that relationship was over with, I had no capacity to be in a relationship with anyone else. And I wouldn't have started or sought recovery if it wasn't for this person intervening and saying, Scott, you should look me in the eye. I remember very well. Scott, you're absolutely hopeless. You're never going to change. She was doing for her what she had to.
And the thing is, I'm sorry to interject, but I wanted to just get this in real quick. The thing is that it almost seemed like a child. Like the more you let the behavior go, the worse it was getting each time, and the lying and the deceit. And I was like, hey, wait a minute, how much of an opportunity or chance do you give this person to change or to recover or to draw it back? But it was out of my hands. My second question is, part of the question is it okay after a period of time, let's say like a year? I don't want any romantic relationship, but is it fair to say, okay, we can have a friendship? Because the thing is that the people, it was like you're saying, the women that he was with before, you could just get on the horn and say, hey, because they had so much in common with those vices. It was like, to me, it was just so disrespectful, and I was like, oh, no way. I have boundaries. This is the way I want to live my life. This is the kind of partner I want to be with. And hey, it might be difficult for you, but it's not for me. I'm going to say no.
Yep. Okay. So there's a lot. I imagine that there's a lot of people who are listening to who have the question of how can I support or help my loved one who's struggling with an addiction? One of the most common questions we get, and it's a very reasonable question. And, the recovery is not just for the individual who is impacted, who has the addiction, but it's for everyone who is affected by addiction. That means family members, that means friends or loved ones or significant others. seek help. When you are sick and tired, when the addict is sick and tired of being sick and tired, they're going to try something different. But until then, they're just going to keep in the same addiction cycle that they're active in. When the family member or loved one is sick and tired of being sick and tired, then they're going to do something different as well. You can choose to allow addiction to be present in your life or not. You have that choice. It's a matter of going about it, having honest conversations, giving specific feedback about how another person's behavior has impacted you. That can be very helpful. However, you didn't cause the addiction, you can't control it, and you cannot cure it. Just as a friend or a family member, be very aware of those three things.
Bella, God bless you, and thank you so much for the call. Still lots of folks on with questions for Scott, so on we go to Tampa, Florida. Jack in Tampa, Florida, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Go ahead, Jack, with your question.
Hi there. I had a question regarding food addiction. You brought that up a few times during the hour, and I was just thinking, when it comes to drinking, somebody could just stop drinking, or smoking, somebody could just stop smoking cigarettes. But how does one really tackle food addiction? You can't just give up food,
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And that is something, I formed and began Catholic in Recovery 2015, 2016-ish or so. And this has been a big part of my life since then. Probably the biggest revelation that I've realized has been that there are just as many people affected by food-related addictions as there are people impacted by substance abuse addictions, alcohol and drugs. It's not something that when we think of addiction, we often don't think of food addiction as a challenge, but it is very, very common that people struggle with food-related addictions, either compulsive overeating. In other cases, it can be restricted eating. But a lot of the same tendencies between the compulsive eater and the person struggling with alcoholism or drug addiction. There is a woman who started a Catholic in Recovery group in Portland, Oregon, who taught me a lot about this. She active in a recovering overeater fellowship for quite some time. And she said exactly what you just mentioned. She said, Scott, we use these terms. We use the term sobriety to define someone who's found freedom from alcohol. And we use the term abstinence to describe someone who's found freedom from food addiction. Whereas she says, Scott, that's backwards. You as a recovering alcoholic, are actually abstinent. You don't engage at all. You just don't touch the stuff. As a compulsive overeater, I need to take the tiger out of its cage 3 times a day, and I need to do that with sober ambition and a sober spirit. And so you're absolutely right that this is, food-related addictions, very, very common. Also, needs to be handled with the same tenacity that an alcohol or drug addiction needs to be dealt with. Find other people who have found the solution. In a lot of cases, sugar and flour are kind of the key activators here. When someone who is struggling with a food-related addiction has either sugar or flour, that creates a craving and a mental obsession inside of them that is very similar to the way that an alcoholic having a drink of alcohol is there's this obsession that's activated once we engage. And so there are some similarities, there are some nuanced differences, but still, you need to approach it. You can have the 12 steps. There are plenty of 12-step groups related to food or related addictions. We've got Catholic in Recovery meetings specific for food-related addictions. There is some nuanced differences, but still, the 12 steps is a common solution that can provide freedom and a spiritual awakening.
Jack, that takes us right to the break, Jack, but check out CatholicInRecovery.com for more information. And again, I do really appreciate the call. We'll take this break. We'll be right back with more Scott Weeman on addiction and recovery from a Catholic perspective on Catholic Answers Live.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you ready to spread your wings? Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with exclusive news, program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective?
Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Scott Weeman has become a regular here at Catholic Answers because we just value so much what he does and who he is. And Catholic in Recovery is something that you should check out. And I feel like this, and I don't know if I'm the only person, but you can send me an email at radio@catholic.com if you agree or if you have any suggestions. I feel like we need Scott to be in media more. I think we need him doing a podcast or something on recovery, and maybe we'll get you there, Scott, at some point. But
stay tuned.
I'd love to hear what people think about that. Just send us an email, radio@catholic.com, because we do what's essentially a question and answer apostolate here at Catholic Answers, and it's usually on doctrines and that kind of thing. But what you do, I think, is so needed, that to the sharing, the overcoming of shame, the stories that are involved and can give people hope. So I'd like to see that in Catholic media. I really would.
Addiction is very isolating, and it wants us to believe that we're the only ones that are struggling with this problem.
Yeah.
And so we keep it, we keep our secrecy, we stay in denial, we don't let anyone know because we feel like we're terminally unique.
Yeah.
Like the solution doesn't apply to us.
Yes,
so it's important for storytelling and hearing the stories of people who have found freedom. From a variety of addictions.
In studio with us is Isaac from Pennsylvania, but he's a student at Catholic University. They are on spring break, and as so many spring breakers do, he came to Catholic Answers. Hello, Isaac.
Hi.
How do you like Catholic University?
Oh, it's awesome.
It is, really? We hear such good things about that. It's a really quite sturdy Catholic university.
Oh, I agree.
Do you? Mm-hmm. Very good. I'm glad to hear it. You got a question for Scott?
Yeah. So I was kind of thinking about addiction, as is the topic, and I was wondering, is all addiction sinful, and is there something that is there something unique to addiction itself that makes it sinful?
That's a great question. So addiction, we can get addicted to good things and bad things, kind of. An addiction to alcohol or addiction to pornography or cocaine, methamphetamines, we can agree that those are not good things. An addiction to working out, an addiction to attending church, an addiction to an addiction to Catholic Answers Live. These things are all probably
you're on thin ice
these are
right now,
these
buddy.
are good things. But if they are prioritized above other good and important things in our lives, then they can provide a barrier to spiritual growth. And really, by definition, if we were to look at a clinical definition of addiction, there are a few components that really to qualify us for addiction. That means that there are an increase in tolerance. So it requires more or more extreme doses in order to achieve the same level of satisfaction or effect. And second, it has to have consequences. There have to be some kind of consequences in our life that's experienced, professional consequences, personal consequences, and such. And so if you are addicted to Catholic Answers Live and not showing up for dinner with your family, then that might be an addiction, and that might be, I don't know. So it's not my job, I would say, to deem what is sinful and what is not sinful. I think that we have some pretty good parameters around that. But if we're putting something in the place of God as an idol, then that might be a bit sinful. If we're seeking something that could be in placement of God. So, great question, Isaac. Wonderful question.
You satisfied with that answer?
I think so. If we're acknowledging that there is a addiction, let's say like working out, right? Then, and you limit yourself and say, well, I'm not, I just want to kind of stay active, then wouldn't it still be better to just not have the addiction in the first place? Or is it that by kind of controlling it, then it's no longer an addiction if it's a good thing?
Yeah, if you can moderate it, then it probably is not an addiction. Is that kind of what you had in mind, like working out? Was there something that you were thinking of?
Yeah, I guess that was pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that if there aren't consequences, and then it may not be. I wouldn't categorize it as an addiction. It's probably just a lifestyle in a lot of ways. However, some people get sober and then they spend all of their time in recovery meetings, which is, they have a great beneficial presence in those meetings. Their spiritual life is awoken by the newcomer coming in and them being able to find meaning and purpose in their life. But if we don't just get sober just to stay in meetings, though. We get sober so that we can live a purposeful and meaningful life outside of our lives, and so that we can be active in our communities and in our job and in our personal relationships. So, even things like recovery meetings, can kind of take the place of other healthy things in our lives. And so, whereas I might not categorize that as an addiction, I would say that we want to be temperate. The cardinal virtue of temperance can be a very helpful guide as far as seeking whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Isaac, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed you coming in. It was very nice to see you all, such fine young men from Catholic University, and doing the whoop whoop out there. Thank you. Arsenio was off the air before you guys were born. You can't do that whoop whoop thing. The number is 888-318-7884. I'm going to go to Teresa in Washington. I want to tell you, though, I'm happy you put us in the going to church and working out category, not in the cocaine and heroin category. I appreciate that. Teresa in Washington, D.C., listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. We're glad you're here, Teresa. Go ahead with your question first. Well, do I have Teresa? Teresa, are you there? Uh-oh. I think I don't have Teresa. Okay, we had a little phone mix-up, and I apologize for that, but we will... if Teresa wants to call back, we'll get her on there, 888-318-7884. Allison wasn't able to stay on the line, but she asked this. I'm noticing a lot of similarities between the STEP program and Ignatian spirituality. Are you aware of any Ignatian programs or retreats that incorporate the STEP program?
This is a great awareness, Allison. There are plenty of great Ignatian spirituality programs. In fact, there's an organization called the Ignatian Spirituality Project that provides weekend retreats that integrate 12-step wisdom with the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. This is exactly what in 1939, or the late 1930s, early 1940s, Father Ed Dowling was a Jesuit priest from St. Louis and knocked on the apartment door of AA's founder, Bill Wilson, saying exactly this, saying, I see your 12 steps, and I find a lot of similarities between them and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And he then became really a mentor and kind of a sponsor to Bill W., one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and provided a lot of really wonderful Catholic influence in the early formation of Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step groups.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to go now to Robert in Des Moines, Iowa, listening on 94.5 FM, Iowa Catholic Radio. Robert, go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Hi, Scott. It's interesting listening to you. And so I got the book that when I called a couple months ago when Jimmy was on.
I remember.
And I'm the guy that was been on methadone for like 30 years. I'm 68. I'll be 68 next month, and I've been on since I was 38. After about 20 years of opioid use, and what I was wondering about this methadone is just such a long-lasting half-life. I mean, the last time I got off, I truly was not sleeping and not feeling good for a year.
Yeah.
It just had no energy and just all my pains and aches were coming back. And I don't even feel the doses that I take daily. I truly don't. And I was just wondering, and I'm 68, maybe I got, who knows. Well, my father lived to 90, so did my mother, but I haven't lived the clean life they did. But is it worth getting off? I mean, or is it, I don't even feel it. No one knows I'm on it.
Okay.
It's not like you're walking around drunk. I just stay on it. And
Scott?
This is... Yeah, great question. So methadone being a replacement for people who are getting off of opioids, very, very addictive, has not only a spiritual and a cognitive and an emotional grip on us, but also a physical grip on us, and particularly opioid addiction has this really great physical, our bodies need it. It almost becomes dependent upon it. And so methadone, Suboxone is another drug that can be used to help get people off of the hard drugs of opioids, whether they're prescribed or non-prescribed. And also, as Robert's describing, then people can kind of stay on that for a long time. A lot of times when a doctor is prescribing, and this is really, there are various ways to look at the world. One is through a spiritual lens, another is through a physical lens, and a doctor's typically going to be looking at the world and what's best for you from a biological standpoint. And so this does allow, some things like methadone or Suboxone does allow your body to not have all of the bad effects of a hard drug like an opioid, but still not also have the withdrawal symptoms that can be devastating and even life-threatening. And so I'm not, certainly I would not make any changes to a methadone program without consulting a doctor. I am not authorized to be making any recommendations of someone getting off of that. But I think that if you do have an ambition to get off of it and live freely, share that with your doctor and explain the why behind it. Explain, not only is, the physical reasons for it, but also the spiritual and the way that you view the world. And I think that you can work together with a doctor. If you do feel like this is you feel called, like you've brought this to prayer, you've had conversations with people that you trust about this, and they think that it's best for you. There's a lot of nuanced conversations that probably need to take place, but if you've got an authorization from trusted peers, mentors, and a doctor, then I think that it certainly can be done.
Robert, all right?
And I know one thing, it's certainly not the best way to live a life. It's not it is, it takes, I was a wonderful salesman before I started, and once I got on methadone, I just went from making all sorts of money to having a hard time making $200 a week. And this is back in the 80s, of course, early 80s.
Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, Scott had something.
Yeah, I would encourage you to limit the judgment, limit judgments of yourself. It is what it is, and
there's not a moral imperative on him right now, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a medical thing, and as Scott said, he's not going to give you medical advice on that. But I do feel like sometimes. If Robert's problem is I just don't know morally if I'm doing the wrong thing, that should not be the primary concern here.
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Thanks, Robert.
But as he described, there are benefits to getting off of methadone.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Josie in Southern. Robert, call again too. I always enjoy when you call. Josie in Southern Michigan, listening on Ascension Radio. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
I'd like to know, Scott, how the Catholic Church refers to Sister Ignatia Gavin as co-founder of AA. I was listening to American Catholic History on Alexa and found that, my golly, this sister is instrumental in starting the knowledge that AA people are physically sick as well as can be mentally sick.
Josie, I got to let Scott answer because we're right up. I didn't realize we're right on the break here.
Yeah. So I mentioned Father Ed Dowling had an impact in forming AA and the 12-step programs in its early formation, as did Sister Ignatia, who was active in a hospital in Northeast Ohio, where kind of AA got started. Really, it started when one alcoholic shared the good news with another. And in turn, that kept both of them sober, and they looked for the third person. And yeah, Sister Ignatia was active in the hospital in which they were active and working. And I hear of her more often in recovery circles than I do in the church. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us in the church to recognize the profound social impact that Sister Ignatia had in providing a route to healing that maintains Catholic spirituality.
Well, thanks for bringing her up, Josie. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody who called. Thanks to our guest, Scott Weeman. We really enjoy it when you come here, Scott. I
Thank you,
hope I made that clear. The Catholic in Recovery Workbook is available now at CatholicinRecovery.com. It's a guide to the 12 steps. Also available at Catholic in Recovery, all kinds of resources on the Catholic faith and recovery, even resources where you can start a group. Yeah. All right. Send me an email, radio@catholic.com, if you want to talk about Scott Weeman possibly doing a podcast or something. Maybe you got a good idea. Scott, thanks again. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.